So, welcome all to this month's first Friday with a thought leader. Our thought leader is here, so we are very excited. It is my pleasure to bring you Alaina Szlachta, an academic turned entrepreneur, and she is the founder of By Design Development Solutions, helping training and coaching firms use their organization's original data to differentiate themselves in the marketplace, attract new clients, reduce customer churn, and expand their intellectual property. Drawing on her background as a researcher and public health educator, she specializes in data strategy and systems implementation, from conducting data audits to designing collection, analysis, and workflow systems that drive revenue and influence. She's also the author of the ATD Press book, Measurement and Evaluation on a Shoestring, a resource written to make measuring impact easier and more accessible for anyone, regardless of their expertise, which is dear to my heart because measuring matters. So it is such a joy and an honor to bring Alaina.
Yes, I am what I would call a shoestring professional, which means that I have played almost every role in learning and development and leadership development, and I've never had the ideal budget to measure. And yet, I was charged with making sure that we were doing the right things. So, yes, that book is all about that. And I love serving those audiences who feel the same way. So today we have got 20 minutes of time just purely with this conversation, and then we'll leave it to Q&A because a lot of you will have ideas and questions that we want to workshop after I share what I'm thinking is a core ingredient to making your work more impactful. And it was quite a challenge, Janice, to figure out what could I share that in 20 minutes would actually change people's thinking and get them closer to what they want to be doing, which is really impactful work with the data that proves how it's going. So our topic for today is moving beyond a request for team development to really getting closer to that ROI side of the equation. And so I've got two things for you. One is I just want to take a moment and get a sense of what are your challenges around making that transition. And then the second thing is I've prepared a diagnostic tool that to me is the best of the thinking around how do you take an intake conversation, like when somebody comes to you and says, hey, I could use your help. Our team isn't doing what we want them to be doing. When we start from that conversation, there's a lot of magic that can happen, or there are things that we might miss the mark that can make our later delivery of a program not quite do what we hoped it would do. So we're going to start by really digging into what does that conversation look like when we get a request or we get a client coming in. And so here is my question for you, and I'm going to invite you to join me in Slido. It is a simple tool to see what your challenges are and allow you to upvote. So my request is, and I'll share here in just a moment, the screen so we can see everyone's responses. You know what good team development looks like. And my question for you is when you're having those upfront intake conversations, when a client asks you for support, we know that we need to get a sense of what are the goals? What are we trying to accomplish? What does success look like? We know that is an incredible part of our process. And yet, sometimes we don't get that information from our clients. We don't get what does success look like. We don't get goals that make sense or are even measurable. And so my question for you is, what are the barriers when you're having those conversations? What are the barriers to getting the information about success in those conversations? So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that we can all see what are some of the common challenges that people experience. And what my request to you is, as everyone is sharing here, if you can put a thumbs up next to the things that you also resonate with. So we can get a sense of what are the main challenges that folks in this room are experiencing when they're having those upfront intake conversations. And this first one is so spot on, moving past a one-day workshop, because transformation doesn't just happen in one day. Yes, we have to build in a different kind of engagement.
Point of
This is another
clarification,
great one.
Alaina, are these just questions that we ourselves are grappling with, or are these questions we could ask our clients for what they're grappling with?
Great question. And I'm sort of using Slido in an off the wall kind of way. So this isn't a Q&A, but I love this feature of Slido. What I'm asking you to share is, what are your biggest challenges when you're having that conversation with a client and you're not able to get clear on what success looks like in order to deliver and then measure how well your engagement went with them? Does that help?
Yes.
Great. What are your greatest challenges? And then feel free to upvote. And so we can see the things that are resonating with folks. So far, the top challenge that resonates is that we don't have enough time for an in-depth conversation. That's real. Talk about shoestring, right? When we're on a shoestring, time and money are our biggest constraints, but that doesn't mean that we still can't do something meaningful within the resources that we have. I'm also seeing lots of folks are resonating with trying to move past the one and done approach to team development. How do we start moving in that direction with that intake conversation? Ooh, this is another good one. Different stakeholders, different success measures. And then this is so true, not understanding what team coaching or development even looks like. Wonderful. What else? Let's see some other things that are coming in. The description of success is vague and not measurable. My diagnostic tool will help with this. So that's great that that's come up. Most of what we measure is at least somewhat subjective. That's okay. And we'll talk about how we can navigate that too. I'm laughing because I can see that. I can see times when a client is so upset about what's going on with their team that they can't think past the conflict and the drama. I get that. That can definitely hurt things. All right, I'm going to come back to the top and see if we've changed what our top things are, but it's looking like our top challenges are just simply time. We don't have enough time, moving past some limiting beliefs that our clients bring to the conversation, and then really not being able to broadly and specifically address what success looks like. Feel free to keep putting things in here if you'd like to as we keep talking, but I'm going to stop share and I'm going to share another resource. And so team, if you can just put a thumbs up that you can see this. Did we see my screen shift? Thumbs up. Awesome. Okay, great. So oops, I switched it back. Didn't mean to do that. Here we go. So this particular visual, when I talked with Janice and the team, they were like, most people really struggle with how do we connect team development to what matters for the business? And this piece is actually really easy. The difficult part is unpacking the data and the needs of the client to get a chain of evidence that is accurate and useful. But let's just start to make sure we're on the same page, that this is what the relationship looks like, from training, our investments in training and coaching, all the way to business goals. So when we do a targeted development initiative, it simply removes friction. And that looks a lot of different ways. So while broadly speaking, we're making people perform better, work better together, we're removing friction that makes people do what they do best. But that, like you've said already, is subjective. What does it mean to remove friction? So we have to know how to unpack that. Then, and this is the piece that I think we overcomplicate as an industry. When we do development initiatives, especially for teams, the one domino that we've got to knock over is productivity. There is nothing else. Don't overcomplicate it by trying to get to engagement and this and these are all important things. But at the end of the day, our clients are investing in us because they want their teams to be more productive. Now, while that makes sense, we do have to figure out how we collect the right data to make that relationship clear. And all of that magic happens in our intake process. But then, as we just unpack this a little bit further, we invest in team development for productivity gains. There is no other thing that matters. But then when we pull that out a little bit more, we care about productivity gains mainly for revenue changes. And long term, it's a net profitability play. So I really like to use this visual, and I'm going to share this with you all in chat so you can use it too with clients. I highly recommend that when a client comes to you and says, hey, can you help us? We're seeing XYZ, or just help. We don't know what's going on, but we need you to come and make a difference for us. I like starting with this and use some other version that maybe resonates better, but start with this visual and tell them, like, here's what we're trying to accomplish. We're going to develop the team. We want to remove friction. We want to get to productivity gains. And this is why that matters, so that everybody is clear. And I saw that in the challenges that, like, sometimes our clients or our stakeholders, they don't know what team development can or should do for the business. So this kind of knocks that challenge out from the get-go. Always start with, what does success look like theoretically? So that's where we can knock over some of the challenges. Well, success is too broad. You should bring the framework of what success looks like, and then you collaboratively with your client fill in the gaps. And that's nuanced and that's unique to their situation. But show them what success looks like theoretically and tell them, I'm going to ask you some questions that helps get us clear on what we're going to do in the development and what data we'll collect along the way to measure and monitor if what we're doing is working. So that's where, up above, I've got the question. So start with, where are we going theoretically? And then once you've sort of laid that framework and they know where you're going, and this is a piece that I feel I've encountered numerous times. A lot of times our clients don't know where we're going with the conversation. They don't know why we're asking certain questions. So that's why I start with the broad piece first, and then we can go back to get some of the specifics. So the intake question, use this one, use a variation. Maybe you have a great intake question you're already using that's working, but I love this question. What are you observing on your team that's getting in the way of productivity? And I can be specific with this question because I've already set the stage that we're looking for productivity gains. And I'm driving the conversation to fulfill the framework because I know that productivity gains is the one metric that matters when it comes to team development. But what productivity looks like, what's getting in the way of productivity, unique to the client. So this question allows us to start getting into the nuances of what should we be targeting. And so I used my handy dandy AI tool of choice, Claude, and you could do this too, or you could just use this resource. And I asked Claude, I said, hey, can you do some research and find what are the top 10 barriers to team productivity and show me the research behind it. And so this is where I got these top 8 barriers. And they all kind of make sense. Why is it that teams might not be able to be productive? What are some of the barriers that are getting in the way? And when we ask this question, what are you observing? We're listening for one of these primary barriers. And so what I have here is just an example. If I click on one of these barriers that are revealed in the conversation, I get some context and the research behind it that says, hey, if I'm hearing that unclear goals and priorities are a problem, here's the impact of this. So this is the process that I'm recommending for you all. Some version of this. We set up the framework so that the client knows where you're going. You ask an open-ended question, but it's targeted. I'm using specific words. What are you observing? That takes subjective down to a little bit more objective. And I'm literally plugging in the outcome already. I'm not asking them to clarify if productivity is the problem or the goal. I'm telling them this is what we're going to gain by working together. But how we get there is unique. So as I'm listening to the answer from the client, I'm listening for one of these 8 barriers. And there's a couple of ways in the conversation that you could use this. One, you could just have this as a cheat sheet for yourself. Or 2, you could share this list with your client and say, which of these 8 things resonates with you that are potential barriers to productivity? And maybe your client can immediately say, oh, we're not communicating. There's low psychological safety, ambiguous roles and ownership. So you can do this in either way. If you feel like time is a barrier, as we've already agreed, I would suggest that we share the 8 things that are primarily getting in the way of team productivity and say, hey, this is what the research shares. So you're bringing valid things and you're forcing the conversation to identify what is getting in the way in a performative and observable thing. Each one of these things are observable and therefore measurable. And so if you use this tool or create your own, you can then add a little research. Great. Here's what research says is the impact on the team if unclear goals and priorities are a problem. And then you can clarify, is energy low? Is critical work stalling? So it allows you to just validate that if somebody broadly says that unclear goals and priorities are a problem, then we can use the research to say, okay, well, here's what it might look like if this is the biggest barrier. Are you noticing these things? So this is a great way to use other people's research to validate this is the biggest barrier. And then we can get to work doing what we do best, which is figuring out, once we know what the biggest barriers are, what's the most appropriate development opportunity. And so I want to share 2 final resources with you, and then I'm going to stop share. We can go back into this when we do Q&A. But I want to share 2 excellent resources. This book is from 1995. So if anyone ever tells you we don't know how to have performance consultative conversations because we don't have access to a great resource, they're lying to you. This book is incredible. And I reference it all the time. And I'm not going to go into the details. You can buy it yourself and read it. It literally is the Bible for how do we know we're talking to the right person? Because oftentimes if we're not getting the right information, we're not talking to the right person. So this book will help you figure out who should you be talking to and what should you be asking them. And then if figuring out what the right development initiative is, this is a great book. Helping people change. If many of you do coaching or training, this book has some excellent questions, case studies that can help you better narrow down. Okay, now we know what the major barriers are, and we validated that by asking some strategic questions. What should we be doing to help people? This book is a great resource to help you think through that. And of course, if collecting data is a challenge for you, my book, Measurement and Evaluation on a Shoestring, is a great resource too. But I really find that if we're talking to the right people and we're asking the right questions in our intake, the data source is revealed to you in those questions. And then all you have to do is collaboratively come up with how do we get access to that data to then measure, are we increasing productivity? And did the development initiative itself help as a domino to not over productivity? When we're asking the right questions and talking to the right people, all of that is a lot easier. So Janice, I have no idea if I talked for 20 minutes or 30, but that's what I have for you. And I wanted to make sure we had time for Q&A. And again, I'm happy to go back into the visual and unpack anything further, but those are the core concepts and resources that I think will solve a lot of the challenges that you mentioned at the start of this talk.
That's great. Well, certainly, thank you. That was a lot. And measurement is so important. And it's actually not something that we could just be doing. I could just be doing, and we can be doing a lot more of it. So thank you so much for that. And with that, I open it up to our community. Please feel free to raise your hand or just come off mute. Raising your hand could be helpful since we have around 40 people on the call. So anybody who has a question, raise your hand. Otherwise, I've got a few in my pocket.
Well, I'm going to put this diagnostic tool in the chat. So I'm sure folks are like, hey, feel free to snag that and to use it when you're wanting to big picture, narrow, and just follow that process in your intake process.
Great, thanks. All right, Mr. Sibley.
Hello. This is great, and congratulations on the Claude. That looks really nice too. I'm curious about the people side of it, in addition to the productivity side of it, and maybe it's just because you showed performance consulting, but to what degree do you integrate questions about, um, in addition to getting results, are people enjoying working together? That side of things.
That's a great question, Jonathan. And I am going to go back into my share and just unpack again some of those common barriers to productivity. And so we have things that are more businessy, like unclear goals and priorities, poor communication, et cetera, et cetera. But I would say that when we think about things like engagement or how well are people enjoying working together, those are some of the what I would call, okay, imagine that you're trying to identify observable indicators of some of these things. If people are enjoying working together or they're not, those would be some of the observable indicators that we might have. For example, low psychological safety. People aren't enjoying working together. Or maybe poor communication. Maybe what's going on is that people are just not working well together, and therefore communication is showing up as complex. And so what I see as what you're asking about are some of the, if we unpack big picture to that micro level dynamic, that would be your chain of evidence that says, okay, well, here's our long-term business goal, but to get there, we've got to get people to like working together. But we want to make sure that we're tying that to another more businessy language, because I think a lot of our challenges as development professionals in training and coaching is that we know that those things matter, but sometimes our clients or our business leaders are like, well, I just care about productivity. How is people liking each other going to get us there? So this is a way of connecting those dots.
Okay, so just a different path there.
100%. And I think of it as, what are you observing on the team that you feel is getting in the way of productivity? Somebody might say there's a lot of conflict and drama on our team. And then you can say, great, tell me what that looks like, or how does that show up when you're working with the team? Well, they're not communicating well. Okay, great. Now we're getting a little bit closer to some of those primary barriers that get in the way of productivity. So when I'm asking questions, I'm listening for what of these 8 common barriers are showing up on the team, because then I can develop an initiative that gets closer to the business goal. Because if we get people to like each other better, but we don't know why that matters, then it's harder to get to the productivity, which is what the business cares about.
Great, thank you. Can I ask one other question?
Yeah.
Have you used this with team members as well and aggregated the results?
What I would suggest doing, think of this as a hypothesis. So a client comes to you. This could be your boss. This could be someone who you're wanting to work with, or they've agreed, hey, we want to bring you on as someone to help with this problem. I would work out what I call a hypothesis with this diagnostic tool and get your requester, the one that's paying the check, to really flush out with you, okay, what are the biggest barriers to productivity? And then flush out what is the productivity metric that we're trying to influence, and then take that to the people on the team and say, hey, this is what we've come up with. Does this resonate with you? And if it doesn't resonate with you, what's missing? What has the stakeholder not identified that may be another barrier to the team working together? So I 100% agree that getting multiple perspectives is really important. And in fact, I talk about that in my book too, about one of the greatest things we could do is get a return on expectations measure into our programming. And that's simply asking people, like, what do you expect will change if we're developing the team correctly? And the team's perspective on that is really important. And then when our development initiative is over, following up with them and saying, hey, you said that this was a challenge. Now that we've been doing this engagement for 3 months, 6 months, whatever, do you see that we're moving the needle with this thing that you really saw was important to change? Great way to measure the outcomes of your investment.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, great questions.
Absolutely, that's great. And that's helping team members focus on observable behavior is so key. It minimizes that mind reading that, we're just not very good at as human beings.
And is ripe with assumptions too. If we think we can read minds, we're probably making a bunch of assumptions that some could be right, but maybe some of them are importantly wrong.
Exactly. All right, Kate, you're up.
Thanks. So I'm curious, Alaina, when you showed the flow chart
Mm-hmm.
with the sort of targeted development at the top,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then sort of what we can expect as we
Mm-hmm.
go through the engagement.
Mm-hmm.
I immediately went to, maybe there's a multiple touch points in order to kind of get through that flow chart, right? We're not saying, like you said, one and done.
100%. Yep. Yeah,
And
I
I'm
think,
curious,
yeah,
just
go ahead.
quickly, yeah, if the client ever asks you to kind of map what you're doing to that chain.
Yes. And I think we can do that better when we're really clear on what our primary barriers are. Um, and I didn't talk at all about design because we have an hour for the whole conversation today and 20 minutes of like what would be a great conversation to diagnose what's going on. But what I recommend is that you also use, and I'm going to stop share so I can find the link and you don't watch me do that. But I wrote, and I've been doing research on capabilities, and capabilities, different than skills, are what enables human beings to do something. So skills are just one piece of the puzzle. Capabilities are also things like morale and clear expectations, and do I have enough past experience to do the new task at hand. And I think when we're developing an initiative that's meant to change some kind of performance or action on the other side, we lean into skills and we miss the rest of it. And capabilities can really help to flush out what are all the touch points, as you say, Kate, that are important along the way. And so I wrote a Substack. Oops, there we go. Let me find that. It was just last week's post. And it actually talks about what is included in capabilities and how should we ask which capabilities to prioritize in our initiative. So here we go. It took me a minute to get there, but this is a really great addition. And also research. So the capability checklist that I created is just based on other people's research that say capabilities are inclusive of much more than skills. Like, let's not just limit what we do to skill development. It is not the only thing, and sometimes not even the right thing to be prioritizing when we're developing and making changes on teams and an organization. So I highly recommend that you can use that as another tool, especially if your challenge is that our clients or training requesters don't really get team development, that it is a nuanced thing. And so this is another layer of research that you can say, hey, capabilities is what we should be targeting in our overall development. And then ask them, of these 10 things, which does this group of people already have? They already have clear expectations, or they already have the right experience to do the tasks or to do their job, but maybe morale is low. Maybe there's no buy-in. So there's capabilities are comprised of lots of different things that when they all work together, that's when we see development initiatives succeed. But if we're missing some of those important dynamics and capabilities, we might not have a successful initiative over time.
Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you for that, Kate. All right. Alexander has a question.
I do, and I apologize for the background noise. I'm in a hotel lobby today. Alaina, thank you. This is really great, and I have a question for you about language and semantics because different terms are batted around. Team effectiveness is what we should be focusing on. Oh, it's team performance, it's team cohesion. You've landed on productivity, which I think is a really interesting term. Um, was there a thought process that got you to that word versus all the other ones that are talked about? Just curious.
Great question. And I think it's the right term to use if we're trying to speak the language of the business. Productivity is what your managers are required to make happen on a team. So, productivity is what department heads are looking at. Productivity is what the C suite, when they're looking at their dashboards and the things that keep them up at night, they're looking at productivity. And all the other language that you used, those are things we might want to target and may very well target in a development initiative. but we're really at the end of the day trying to improve or just fix why the productivity challenges are broken. So it's kind of a if there was one word we could use because we don't want to overcomplicate things, I would choose productivity because it really sets the stage of why we're doing what we're doing. That makes sense to us as learning and leadership development people, but also makes sense to the business. So it's more of a streamlining approach than having to do a little bit more work to educate on why these other things might matter.
Okay, just as a follow-up. So
Yeah.
when I saw your little words, it was output, which makes sense. So the amount of output we're getting from a team. There was velocity, which I thought was interesting, which is
Mm-hmm.
how quickly are we doing it? Sounds like
Mm-hmm.
an efficiency play.
Mm-hmm.
So we're producing output, we're doing it with velocity, efficiency, and then you had morale.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought was an interesting word there. So that I think it's what Jonathan was pointing to. So morale is that an out? How does that fit with productivity, the morale piece? I was curious.
So think of productivity as a bucket. And we can put a lot of things in that productivity bucket. And in fact, to make productivity, we need, just like capabilities, we need people to perform well. We need them to understand what their expectations are. They need clear goals. So productivity is a bucket that we fill up with a few different things that make, or levers, if you want to think of it that way. Like we're pulling different levers all the time to make productivity overall happen. And so when we're targeting, what are we trying specifically? Which lever are we pulling to get the productivity change that we want? It's one of the ways that we can measure productivity is to say, okay, through our diagnostic, we realize that low morale is the thing that's getting in the way of productivity. So, how we then measure if our initiative is successful is if low morale was verified as the thing that is the lever we need to pull to get to productivity. We want to measure that before the investment and as the investment and development is going along. But then productivity is also very specific to the situation. So, what department are you supporting? If it's sales, this is the easy example, forgive me. If it's sales, productivity is always going to be in sales, right? How many of our people on the sales team are closing deals? What's the expected rate of closing and how is the team doing? What's the gap? If you're on the marketing department and you're supporting the marketing team, they're going to have their own productivity metrics that are specific to the team. So while in development, we might use different levers to knock over productivity and to make it better, how your client measures productivity will be specific to what are they observing that's getting in the way of productivity. They're probably going to tell you our sales numbers are off, right? That's the business goal, but that's not necessarily the thing that will help you to design the most appropriate initiative to support the team. That's where some of those different levers come into play. And those main barriers are a great way to narrow that down so that you're not, I mean, think of how many open-ended questions will it take to get to those 8 barriers. Instead, you could just say, hey, research says these are the biggest barriers that get in the way of team productivity. You say the sales numbers have gone down in the last couple of months, the team's not performing. Let's get really clear on what those barriers are. And then that becomes part of your chain of evidence to show that the investment in your initiative is really helping the sales team with those business KPIs. Does that help?
Yes, and the thing that I see then is, we talk a lot about shared goals.
Mm-hmm.
Just worked on that yesterday. Sales team, really coming together around shared goals versus individual team member goals, which creates silos
Mm-hmm.
and a reference group issue. So the productivity leads to shared goals, which leads to coming together, collaboration, cohesion, and what you need to do to be productive together.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
got it. Thank you.
Yeah. And it all goes down to there's probably going to be in this instance, and development is a lifelong thing. We're always going to be navigating, new technology, new team members, new leaders, AI, no AI, right? Like the world is constantly evolving. And so the barriers that are getting in the way of productivity for a team will also always be evolving. So what we're developing in an initiative that's maybe for Q1 might not be the same thing we should be targeting in Q2, even on the same team. I read somewhere or heard on a podcast that as a business grows and scales, so too will their problems. So the problems that a business has early on, as they grow, they're not going to not have problems. They're just going to have different problems that are a little bit more sophisticated. So too will our support of that team. And we want to be constantly evaluating what are those barriers to productivity and how are they evolving as, life and dynamics are too evolving. So there's some great things happening in chat, Janice. Jonathan talks about a model with some quadrants looking at results and team culture. I think that there's a ton of really good models out there. And before leaning into a model that might be too specific, because if, culture may or may not be a challenge to this particular team dynamic issue. And so I never want to pick a model and use it always because it might not be sufficient enough to help us diagnose or to develop with regard to this current challenge. And also, I don't know, Jonathan, if it was you or whoever asked us it was you. How do we validate that the team is also seeing the same challenges as what the client is reporting using that diagnostic tool? So I would just always ask open-ended questions, get close as you can to what the agreed upon barriers, validate that with the team. And then if you find out that culture is a problem, go research all the great models out there around how to target culture change. If you find out that low morale is a problem, go research the models, all of the amazing books that are written about low morale. Find a good model to bring in and use in your development initiative. But I wouldn't recommend that we pick a model that's so specific that it might, again, bias or lead us in a direction that's not quite the right one. So that's my 2 cents on models. They're amazing once you already know that what that model does best is actually the problem you're trying to solve. What else?
Well, I'd like to circle around back to Tosca's question. Tosca, do you want to come on and share? But it's the question around, nonprofit or NGOs and, the word productivity and how that resonates sometimes with them.
Yeah, I don't want to overplay it. Maybe besides what I said in the chat, is one more thought I had is productivity. I think across sectors these days, younger generation in general, they really, push back. They want wellness in the work, and they don't want hyper productivity as the single focus. And especially now with AI, there's even more like hyper. So I'm just saying that in certain organizational contexts that I work in more, I think performance and effectiveness for teams just lands better.
Mm-hmm. I can agree with that. And I think use your judgment on what's the right language and the right context. But one of the challenges with a broad term like performance and effectiveness is it's so subjective and broad that you could go down a rabbit hole that misses, because productivity, whether you're as you mentioned, it's sector agnostic. Every team needs to be performing and acting and producing. Now, is that profit-based or is it something else in service? Whatever it is different. But if we're not productive as a team or as an organization, we aren't fulfilling our mission, whether that's profit or otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
And so just ensure if you're focusing on the language of effectiveness or performance that you can get specific enough around how are you going to measure that? Because one of the reasons I sort of force us into that productivity piece is like, here's the big picture of where we're going, is because everybody understands it. Productivity is just a part of an effectively operating organization.
Yeah, that's fair. Understood.
And I mean, with younger people, wellness is important, or all these things. These are all different levers. And if younger folks or older folks or anyone feels like the organization's not paying attention or balancing wellness with the need to be productive, well, that's a culture shift that should definitely be addressed. And we can, and if we're doing our diagnostic correctly, we should be able to unearth some of those things in that preliminary conversation. But if time is our greatest challenge, I prefer to give people something to react to versus try to use open-ended questions and do my best to fill in the blank, because what if I don't get what I need in that short amount of time? If I'm forcing someone to react to those 8 barriers, I'm forcing them to react to productivity as a goal, I think I'll get more quickly closer to what the problem or the opportunity is by forcing a reaction versus an open-ended question.
Got it.
Great question. Great
Thanks,
reflections.
Tasca. I have a question.
Yeah.
So when we work with clients, we work with individual leaders, but mostly teams.
Mm-hmm.
And then teams of teams.
Mm-hmm.
What have you seen in terms of the connection between an organization's culture and the overall productivity of all the teams within the org, or all the leaders and all the people within the org?
What a nuanced question. You know, the first thing that comes to mind for me are silos and like mini cultures, right? That there might, especially with larger enterprise organizations, when they started out, their founders probably had a vision for the kind of culture and values and ways that people would work together. But as we grow and scale, which is often too fast with not enough thoughtfulness behind it, and then we have to clean up the mess on the back end, we might end up with things like leaders of departments creating cultures of teams that are good or bad, but different than other departments. And it's maybe creating this cascading effect of, you know, we're not as able to, I don't want to use the word control because I don't think control is the goal, but there is something to be said about what kind of cohesive culture are we creating, and being accountable for creating that culture does involve awareness of how is culture actually showing up at an organization. And that has everything to do with some of those capabilities that I mentioned. Are people being hired with the right experience and the right fit, or are they not? Are people coming to the table overwhelmed, or are they being overwhelmed by the work that they're doing? All of those things affect the culture and the ways that people work together. And so I think the best that we can do is help our clients keep a pulse on what's going on, because it's like the fish in water. When we're swimming in something, we can't always articulate what's going on, even though we might feel something is wrong. And so one of the greatest gifts that we can give as outside perspectives is doing some of this diagnostic stuff to say, hey, I think there's something going on here in the culture. Is that something that you want to take a look at? And we can be that mirror for organizations. And I do think it's a never-ending challenge. Cultures don't stay stagnant. They evolve as new people. I mean, new people, younger people coming into organizations will change the culture because of who they are and what they're navigating and what they believe in and what they want to see in the world. So yeah, how do we help them keep a pulse on being responsible and proactive so that everybody works well together? I mean, that's one of our greatest challenges.
Exactly. Wondering if you're seeing more or less of the connection between an organization's values, their culture, observable behaviors of those, and productivity gains or losses.
Gosh, I wish I had a good example of a larger organization that's done it right. Because where I sit, so let me be transparent, who I normally serve are the people who are small enough to control or to try and intentionally create the kind of culture and work dynamics that you can do when you have 15 people. When you have hundreds of thousands of people, oh, and by the way, they're all over the world, it is very difficult to create and maintain a kind of culture that is consistent. And maybe that's even unrealistic. One of the examples I'll say that worked really well when I was internal as a leader for a large national nonprofit, we used intentional frameworks that guided us in how we dealt with some of the most difficult things the organization experienced. So for example, we had we were the domestic violence hotline. That just gives you all the context you need. So, as a domestic violence hotline, one of the greatest challenges was people being burnt out from the kinds of vicarious trauma that naturally happen when you're talking to people in some of the worst dynamics of their lives. And they're just trying to figure out how to be safe and what's the right next step to take. So, we also had to deal with performance issues because, as you can imagine, what happens when someone's burnt out, they don't show up. Their work suffers. Maybe they have a bad attitude, and it's not because they're bad people, bad humans. They're just burnt out. And so we used the appreciative inquiry approach. We did research. We hired a consultant that would help us to figure out how do we as an organization buy into a way of navigating performance challenges, because that's how it showed up in the business was people were not performing well. And the managers who dealt with those performance issues needed a way to do that that was culturally aligned and respectful of the work dynamics and how to navigate those things. So we hired a consultant who helped us to roll out appreciative inquiry into every single department. So I was a leader who had to deal with performance challenges, and I learned appreciative inquiry and practiced it, understood why it mattered for the organization. So how can organizations, or how can we help organizations do something similar? I think we can help them to pair, how do we keep a pulse on what's values aligned, which for us, appreciative inquiry was a values aligned approach to dealing with performance problems. So if there are performance problems, how does the company want to deal with them? And how do you deal with them in a way that aligns with who you say you are in the world? There's not a one size fits all approach to that. And we, as consultants or as leaders of teams in the people development sector, we can shape that conversation and just asking those questions. What's a values aligned approach to dealing with a really challenging situation? So I know that doesn't exactly answer your question, Janice, but I know it's a super nuanced thing. And the bigger the organization, the more challenging it is. But I do believe that starting with some of those tough questions of like, who do you want to be as an organization? How do you want the world to see you? And what's the right values and frameworks to use so that we're walking the walk and not just talking it?
Yeah. I love bringing in the values lens into some of the work that we do.
Mm-hmm.
And then some clients actually mandate that. It's like, hey, you're coming in, whatever you're doing, you need to have a values alignment. And here are our values, and here are the observable behaviors. Some, some organizations really get it down, but for being a practitioner in the field, we like knowing what those are.
Yeah.
And, when we can, to bring them in and underscore them, in the observable behavior and how it also connects to productivity.
Yeah, the practice of being an appreciative, the practice of using appreciative inquiry is what actually aligns the values. I mean, we might say we want to use these theories and frameworks because they're values aligned and we hire these consultants, but if the people aren't practicing those things that are like, people are the culture. And so that's again where we can come in and be part of that diagnostic. Hey, we're expected to live these values, but people aren't behaving in these ways. It's a great thing to include in a diagnostic conversation, and then collaboratively figure out what's the next right thing to knock over in that game of dominoes of how we develop the team and get closer to where we want to go.
Yeah, exactly. That's great. Anybody else? I don't want to monopolize the time here. I know Jerry had a question about favorite tools.
Tools about what? There's tools for tools in the world today.
What was it?
Jerry was looking for a tool to survey the organization.
Right.
So following your diagnostic questions, which are great, you have a favorite tool or survey that gets at key organization issues?
I don't actually. So I think whatever tool, anytime you're adopting a tool, how does it fit into your existing ecosystem? So if it's a tool that you want to use on behalf of a client, just asking the client, are you guys a Google or a Microsoft team? And then use Microsoft Forms or Google Forms so that it's easy for them to get the data and integrate it into their ecosystem. That's one criteria I always use. And then two, whatever tool you use, that it's just easy. So for example, if, engagement surveys, if we're participating and helping an organization with engagement surveys, low response rates are always a problem. So how do we pick a tool that might integrate into a quarterly team meeting where everybody's already together and we carve out time in that quarterly meeting where we have everybody do the engagement survey? And maybe we pick 1 or 2 or 3 questions where we can anonymously share the results. I mean, you guys saw me use Slido. Slido is a great tool. I wouldn't recommend it for a survey, but as an example, I really wanted you as a group to see the themes of and be able to vote on, hey, anonymously, this is what resonates with me as a problem or an opportunity. We can use tools like that in the right moments to capture really meaningful data. So my criteria for tools would be integrates into the ecosystem easily, makes the data very easily integrated or exported so that it just doesn't live in this third-party tool and is difficult to access. And that also might have some features where you could do surveys as a group, because you're always going to get better results when everybody's already together versus asking them to do a survey as like one more thing via an email. Yeah, they're never going to answer. You're going to be pulling teeth to get them to respond. So proactively, if we want to get good survey results, we should build it into an existing meeting, training, or something, retreat, something like that.
Yeah, that's great. Last question. We only have a couple minutes left. Julie.
Hi, Alaina. I just wanted to say how much I appreciated your presentation today.
Oh, thank you.
It's for me, this really acknowledges how hard it is to co-create with a client, why the work matters, what really is going to make a difference, and putting that into language that is their language ultimately. We have our own, as you said, we have models that can help all the way through. And we've got to land on language that really matters to them. So you spoke right to my heart today, and thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Well, that is a perfect segue to thank you, Alaina, for being here. Please, everyone come off mute. Give Alaina a big round of applause.
Thank you, Alaina.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Put the book link and into the chat. So please, I highly recommend it. It's something we need to do to not just prove our worth, but to make real difference with the client. Measure, measure, measure.
Yeah.
Great. So thank you, Alaina. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Enjoy your May. See you next month, First Friday. We'll have a big announcement to make, and looking forward to having you all be there.